We gather this afternoon with a grief that is raw, with shock and disbelief. Many times this week I heard people say, we had planned to get together for supper, for coffee, for mudslides, and instead we are gathering to grieve, to give thanks, and to release Carolyn to the tender care of her Creator. Today we celebrate the fullness of Carolyn's life, even as we cry out against the unfairness of a life cut too short. We celebrate the spirit of a woman with grit and persistence, even as we lament the physical limitations that plagued her for much of her life. Carolyn's courage and feistiness, her ability to turn a conversation about her into a conversation about you, her deep commitment to her students, her lifelong transformative work with peace and justice, all of this is gathered up and known by God. All of this is held close to the heart of God. And I hope that today, as we remember Carolyn, you are aware of God's grace at the center and circumference of this service. Join me in prayer. Steadfast God, your love is deep, eternal, and utterly to be trusted. Though we weep at this loss, we know that Carolyn now dwells in that safe place where no storm or night or pain can reach her. Giver of all life, give us now your spirit of comfort and hope. Set our hearts at peace so that we may bring all of ourselves, our shock, our despair, our regrets, and our gratitude before you without fear. In the strong name of Jesus, amen. There are a few things that didn't make it into the order of worship before it was printed. So I want you to know that Isaac Bontrager, Carolyn's great-nephew, composed the piece that he played on his trombone with Glenn. He did that just this Wednesday morning, and it was lovely. And also the recording that we heard for Prelude, that was violin and cello and mandolin, was done by Charlita Erb just yesterday. She could not come, she's watching from afar. She wanted to share something as well. And there have been so many of you this week that wanted to share your gifts of time and food and creativity. And it is a testament to the wide and deep relationships that Carolyn had with this community and beyond. If this is your first time at Assembly, I want you to know that there are restrooms down the hall on the north side of the building. And there is a classroom with toys that is appropriate for children across the hall. We won't have childcare during the service, but if you need to leave with your children, that's a great place to go. Clearly, the ushers have worked hard at finding chairs for everyone, and we don't have the space yet. There are 2 chairs over here if people still want to be seated and need to be seated during the service. There are 2 in the back here as well. There are 2 over here too. So you don't have to be shy if you're a stander, and 1 here. There are places for some of you. And if you need a chair to be comfortable, please find one. Let's continue worshiping now together in song.
Please turn to 616, the blue hymnal. Children of the Heavenly Father. And my understanding is that all the hymns we're singing today are ones that Carolyn had picked out and requested to be sung at her memorial service. Children of the Heavenly Father, save me in His bosom gather, nesting bird nor star in heaven, such a refuge there was given. God is all. And next will be number 18 in the green book, over my head. And I think we may need to stand for this one. And on the verses where it says solo, if you think you have a solo voice, please sing. Over my head, I see music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. And when the world's silent, I hear music in the air. Oh, when the world is silent, I hear music in the air. Oh, when the world is silent, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. And when I'm feeling lonely, I hear music in the air. And when I'm feeling lonely, I hear music in the air. And when I'm feeling lonely, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Now when I think of Jesus, I hear music in the air. And when I think of Jesus, I hear music in the air. And when I think of Jesus, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere.
Words cannot express our feelings of loss, but we're going to make a feeble attempt to say a word or two about our sister. Carolyn was one of my younger sisters. She was 6 years younger than I, full of life and energy and pranks. She enjoyed pulling them, and she pulled a lot of them. She enjoyed school. She was a good student at school. And she enjoyed having fun. Where Carolyn was, there was noise. You could depend on it. She loved good humor. And it was Carolyn, after a thorough study, I discovered that it was Carolyn that took the Middlebury community to a deeper height and a deeper appreciation of the science of procrastination. She, on many occasions, I would see her at midnight, somewhere around there, cramming for something that was due first thing in the morning. That was Carolyn. Or you might see her on a Sunday afternoon up in a tree with a bowl of popcorn and a book, reading a book. She loved life. Her first car was a VW Beetle. Many were the times when I felt extreme empathy and outright pity for the Beetle. If you look closely, you could see under the accelerator a deep indentation where the Beetle felt most comfortable. Where the accelerator felt most comfortable. That was Carolyn. You fast forward it to the last vehicle that I saw her manipulate and totally dominate and intimidate across the living room floor. And again, I felt just a little bit of empathy for the wheelchair. Carolyn drove how she lived. Carolyn was determined. Carolyn got it done. No matter how it was, Carolyn got the job done. And she would do it in a very, very good way. Carolyn will be missed. We will all miss her. I remember in 1980, the original accident. I immediately went out to Charlotte, and I found myself laying on the floor, looking up at my sister that was clamped to a bed, and she's looking down. I'm looking up, and we have our conversation. We communicated that way. Isn't it interesting that 39 years later, I'm still here on the floor. She's still up there. Now she's no longer clamped to that bed, but she's dancing. And I can imagine Carolyn. I knew her quite well. In fact, there were some similarities in personality that didn't always jive very well. But I can picture Carolyn now looking down at me with that smile, that crooked little smile, and she's saying, da na 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 na. That was Carolyn. I love you, Carolyn. I will forever love you, and I will forever miss you.
I'm supposed to follow that? I'm Judy. I'm the sister living in Ohio. So in some ways, my relationship was a little different in that I wasn't here the times when Carolyn needed extra care. I got in on the bigger things such as moving, landscaping, painting, those kinds of things. But those times when I have a little extra soup, would you like some, weren't an option for me. Velma and Shirley did an excellent job of keeping tabs on Carolyn. And I just want to publicly thank them for what they've done for Carolyn. They were there over and over. The last 2 years, my siblings have gathered at our house and held the activities in our barn, which made it easy for her, and she had almost as much room to roam as we did. Well, she did have as much room, but made it almost as easy as us to get around. But as Steve said, she was a go-getter, and the wheelchair was the go-getter. We have a door so that got the results of the go-getter. I think about it sometimes when I walk past the bathroom door and I see the black mark along the side. And I've not painted over it, but it's the wheelchair. One thing we sisters enjoyed was 2 to 3 day excursions, and our last one was in October in Holland, Michigan, which incidentally was planned almost exclusively by Carolyn. One thing we always had to consider was, can she get in? So she got the assurance from the Airbnb owner that he had an acceptable ramp for her to get into the house. Well, truck ramps with 2 small pieces of plywood thrown over the top did not constitute a good ramp. So, since we're sort of can-do people, we decided we were going to see what we could come up with. We found 2x10 pieces of lumber under his patio. They were probably 10 to 12 feet long, so heavy. We went out to his shed and we found blocks of wood. And before long, we had a good ramp. The first one I did neglect to say, when we had these two little pieces of plywood, she drove her chair up on it, gave it the gas, and the piece of plywood went that way. So we left that whole thing there. With his permission, we called, and he said we could leave the ramp there. He was out of state. He had no idea what it took to tear it back down. One of Carolyn's favorite activities on our outing was thrift store shopping. We would spend hours there. In fact, one thing that many of you don't know is all three of us are wearing Carolyn's clothes this morning. If some of you recognize them as some of yours earlier, I'm sorry. We couldn't find anything for Steve, so we let him alone. She was a use it, buy it at a bargain, use it, fix it, and use it again. I almost brought her laundry basket. When it's torn, you get a new one. Not Carolyn, there's black tape around that old laundry basket. Our game of choice together when we were playing was Rook. And since we're all sort of shy and laid back, don't laugh. These games sometimes got a tad vociferous. And I've thought several times in the last few days, there went our Rook games. Her last major surgery was in Cleveland, and then her stay in the nursing facility there gave me the opportunity to be the one involved. And I made many trips to Cleveland with flowers and home-cooked food, which made me light up. It just felt like it was my turn, and it just felt good. Her stoic attitude, even cheerful in the midst of mind-numbing pain and ugliness, things that sometimes I wanted to withdraw from to a safe place so I didn't have to watch her drag herself from one place to the next. While she was far from perfect, I admired mostly her can-do attitude. I rarely heard her complain. And one sentence we heard from her on occasion was, "There's nothing easy about this life." And that was an understatement. But she persevered better than anyone that I know.
I'm Velma, and I'm the middle of the 7 children. Carolyn was my younger sister by 5 years, but in many ways she was my leader. When I wondered what was next for me after my children were out of the house, she became one of my biggest cheerleaders, believing I could do and become what I had no faith to believe for. She pushed me, and if I pushed back, she wanted to know why I was pushing back. She was persistent that way. Carolyn was the one who refused to be identified by her body. She was determined to be more, and I have said many times her independence was both her blessing and her curse. We often didn't know what was really going on until the situation was quite serious, because she didn't want to call for help. She didn't want people to know she was struggling because it made her look needy, and she'd had enough of that, way more than she wanted. I told her on several occasions that she was a pastor's nightmare. Like the time she was diagnosed with breast cancer and wanted her siblings to keep it a secret. She refused to tell pastors and friends until the night before surgery, when I told her I wasn't going to lie to anyone who asked me why I was waiting in the waiting room. Someone else persuaded her to tell. That surgery was done the day before Thanksgiving, and if my memory serves me right, she was back in the classroom by Tuesday of the next week. She clearly did not allow her body to define her. Years ago, when Carolyn was recovering from her 4th back surgery, a friend brought her a single red gladiola, one that had barely begun to open. Carolyn had a strong dislike for gladiolas. She remembered them only as funeral flowers, They were the ones that dominated all the other flowers in the funeral home, and she would go with her youth group to sing for families that had lost a loved one. And so she developed this hatred or this real dislike. She also developed a real strong dislike for the song Lift Your Glad Voices, because that was always the song they ended on. Well, the gladiola that her friend brought her, I think Dave placed in a vase right in front of, on the bookshelf in front of her bed. And she watched it bloom slowly and discovered it had a straight stem and was quite exquisite in its opening and its beauty. The gladiola became a metaphor of healing for her, and she began to love the flower. And she wondered if she could also find beauty and meaning in her helpless state. I would answer her question with a resounding yes. She has made peace with the song, and today we come full circle as us siblings offered her gladiolas. We will admire the flowers, although I wish they were open a little more. They're opening, and we will sing our final song as Lift Your Glad Voices. After bringing Carolyn to the hospital Tuesday evening, hearing how serious her condition had become, and hearing her say several times, "My body can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I think I'm done. Please, no heroics," she finally was admitted to the ICU from the ER. It was decided that I would spend the night with her, and the others went home. There was only one more scan to be done, and that was of her stomach. The surgeon who read the scan came in along with a number of nurses to tell Carolyn the results and to hear her decision. After listening and then a long pause, we asked Carolyn if she understood, and she said, "Sorta." And so we explained again. I asked her who she would like to have help make her the decision about what we did. And she said her sister and Dr. Barb Meyer, to which I responded, "I'm right here." The surgeon called Dr. Barb, and after hearing the news, she said clearly, "No, we cannot put Carolyn through this." I returned to Carolyn's room and got next to her ear and said, "Barb and I think it's wise not to go ahead with the surgery. It's just too much." Carolyn paused, and then she looked at me and she said, "Does this mean I'm going to die?" And I responded, "Yes, it means you're going to die." And then I buried my face in her neck and sobbed, and she put her arm around me and held me. I believe in that moment, she was surrendering to what was to come, and in that moment, she was also comforting me. I will always treasure that memory. Carolyn lived with passion and grit. Her body did not define her in spite of the losses. She lived well, and she died well, accepting what was. We will miss her spunk and her drive. Carolyn, run free, climb trees, dance to the music, play with abandon, and know that you will not be forgotten.
I'm Shirley, and I'm the youngest of the whole gang back here. Carolyn was next to me in age, but she was 5 years older than I was, so there was a big span. When she was leaving for college, I was just starting high school. Our relationship in our younger years was actually quite distant, and it was strained, to say the least. But a number of years later, our relationship became one of friendship. I enjoyed the bantering, but what I especially valued was the deeper and more honest conversations that we had. We talked and we processed. She pushed me to dig deep, and sometimes I pushed back. She asked hard questions, and she was so good at that. The questions were good for me, but I didn't always appreciate them. Last year, when my husband and I sold our house in the country, she offered her basement to live in during the transition. I didn't take her very seriously, knowing it would be an inconvenience for her and us as well. We had to go through her house to get to the basement, which meant we were always going to be bothering her. She said, for the third time, I'm only going to tell you one more time, but you're invited to live in my basement. And we truly knew that she meant it, and she was actually hoping we would. We moved in, assuming it was going to be a month or two until we found a house. That didn't happen. We ended up being there 5 months. And I will never, ever regret those 5 months. Yes, I'd been there for Carolyn a lot. I helped her a lot, but never on a daily basis like this. The simple things that I did for her that took me 2 minutes took her forever. Her love for flowers and gardening didn't end, and it was huge. But maintaining those hobbies requires a lot of work, even for those of us with 2 good legs. But as many of you know her, she was persistent, and she kept on. It was nothing for us to hear her and see her running into things, dropping and spilling a container of yogurt, or even sliding to the floor when transferring out of her chair and needing our help to get back up. Carolyn obviously didn't like to complain, as many of these my sisters and brother have said. She didn't like to talk about her illness or how bad she was feeling. She didn't want her life and her chair to define her. But this last year, I could see she was focused. She was focused on being grateful. I saw it a lot. She expressed it in different ways. In fact, last week in our bitter cold that was so nasty, I was talking to her and she expressed her thankfulness for a warm, cozy house that she could live in. But of course, at the same time, she was lying on the sofa, trying to heal up some more pressure wounds that had developed once again. Her grateful spirit is a reminder to work on my own this coming year. In fact, I'd like to express my gratitude from all of us, from our family to you, for the many, many of you dear friends that were there to help Carolyn when she needed you. During her times of illness, on the couch, in the hospital, or whatever the need was, you know who you are. She felt indebted to so many of you people, and she knew she'd never, ever be able to repay you. Just know that she was, and we are, incredibly grateful for all you've done for her, our sister Carolyn.
Number 121 in the purple Sing the Storybook. Nothing is lost on the breath of God. Nothing is lost on the breath of God. Nothing is lost forever. God's breath is gone, and God will remain.
summer day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass. The one who is eating sugar out of my hand. Who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down. Who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
Number 27 in the green Sing the Journey book, God of the Bible. And let's stand for this one.
I'm Caleb. I'm the older son, and this is John, the younger son. Many of you experienced Carolyn in different wonderful ways. I experienced her as my mother, and an amazing one at that. We've heard the expression, nothing like a mother's love, and it is so true. The love she had for me was unwavering and unconditional. When I was in kindergarten, I had come home and told my parents that I had a crush on my classmate, Jose. And without skipping a beat, both my parents used the word partner rather than boyfriend or girlfriend, so that I knew that there was nothing wrong with me. It wasn't until I was older that I fully understood the complications my life would have due to my sexuality. And not because it was wrong, but because of how judgmental people can be. My mother expressed her concern and sorrow because this is something that I would have to deal with, but assured me that she would be there to support me and love me through it all. And she did. She loved me fiercely. She never made me feel different. She never made me feel like something was wrong. To her, I was her son, whom she deeply loved. We had countless conversations about how hard life can be and how unfair it can be. I remember being humbled by the adversities she faced on a day-to-day basis and how she faced them head on. I looked up to her because of her strength. She was my rock. I remember introducing Mitchell to her, and the two of them hit it off wonderfully. Most of our time spent together was over dinner with the two of them, making fun of me and teasing me and laughing. And it was wonderful. Even in the short amount of time she had spent with Mitchell, she grew to love and like him. My greatest regret is that we won't be able to create more memories with her, and she won't be able to develop a deeper relationship with my partner. Mom, your love has gotten me through the most difficult times, and I will never forget. Thank you for loving me and for accepting me and supporting me. You will be missed.
Mom.
Mom, you gave me the gift of family and unconditional love. You are the strongest woman I will ever know. And I love to test your strength because I wanted big arms like you. So I'd ask you to arm wrestle. You would always win. I loved when we played Karen with Grandpa because I would get a glimpse of your competitive side and would always challenge me when I missed a shot, saying, "John, you could have made that." We would play soccer in the backyard, and you would use your cane to hit the ball. You would always beat me because I would fall over laughing with you. I miss those mornings. I would wake up and try to sneak downstairs without making the wooden floors creak, so I could watch you sitting on the porch swing before you noticed. I miss those nights you would read to me and sing me to sleep. And knowing you would always check on me, even when I forgot to ask. I miss the free wheelchair rides and seeing you at all my soccer games, no matter how embarrassed I was. I miss those long rolls of paper you would watch me draw on for days and trying to solve those puzzles together on Wheel of Fortune. I miss the smell of your custard pie and sticky rice meals. I miss that joke book you kept with all the funny things I said so you could tell your friends later. I miss calling you at your office at Goshen College and leaving messages asking if you knew how much I loved you. I often wonder what you were thinking when you first saw pictures of me. In the exact moment you said to yourself, "Yup, that's my son." Taking your class this last midterm, I couldn't be more proud to see you doing what you love. I'm forever grateful for this community because I know all of you each played a role in part of your story. Thank you. I love you, Mom.
Thank you. A little over 6 years ago, Carolyn asked me if I'd be interested in co-teaching a class with her in jail during May term. As she unfolded the details of how this project came to be, she rekindled a number of 40 years ago when, as a young, naive military policeman, I had spent a year as a prison guard. I firsthand had been a small part of a massive criminal justice system that I could see wasn't just, and I really wasn't sure whether I wanted to revisit that world. It took me a few days to say yes, but as many others have experienced, saying no to Carolyn is really not an option. I'm glad I agreed to give it a try. Carolyn had discovered the Inside Out program based in Philadelphia from Temple University, where college students, called outside students, would be brought into prison to share a class with inmates, inside students, to interactively participate in a semester-long college-level class together. The course material would be molded by the individual professor teaching the course, and the principal purpose of the class was to allow a meaningful interaction between two very different populations that needed to understand each other. In 2013, she headed to Philadelphia for the week-long training with other professors from around the country to learn the inside-out methodology of teaching. Much of this happened within a maximum security walls of Graterford Prison and was led by a team of lifers. Hundreds of college professors all over the country and now all over the world have taken part in this training. I'd like to acknowledge that Susan Hyatt, our Indianapolis coordinator for Inside Out, is here this afternoon. She drove up from Indianapolis to be with us. I'm glad you're here. Carolyn quickly realized that the inside-out methodology of interactive learning was exactly the format she's been using for years, and she was excited to bring it back to Goshen College in the Elkhart County Correctional Facility. All she needed to do was convince two of the most intractable institutions known to mankind, academia and the criminal justice system, to say yes. And there she met a whole barrage of reasons why this wasn't going to work. Bring women into a men's jail? Can't be done.